Hello, I want to talk to you about natural inclusion as a way of understanding our human place in the natural world. Everything I'm going to say to you is symbolized and can be summarized in this image with just three words. Nature includes you. Is there something about the way we view and think about ourselves in relation to nature that is getting us into trouble? Is our current environmental and psychological crisis rooted in a psychological and philosophical problem? If so, how can we change our minds? Here are some things you may have heard about life, environment, and people. You may have heard that we are selfish genetic survival machines vying for supremacy. That we are all interconnected as cooperative parts of a whole that is more than the sum of its parts. That we evolve through natural selection, described by Charles Darwin himself as the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. You may have heard that we are made from chemical building blocks of life, or that we are products of intelligent design, or that we evolve in symbiotic partnership with others. Question I ask is, does our real life experience tell us a different story? I think it does. A story that comes to mind or came to my mind when I viewed this meandering path of a swan down a straight banked channel on the Somerset Levels. A story that helps to bring our thinking and our feelings together. I ask, how do different perceptions affect how we view nature? Here are two views from famous scientists. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. Charles Darwin. The environment is everything that isn't me. Albert Einstein. And here are two perceptions coming from poets, naturalistic poets. In nature, everything is distinct, yet nothing defined into absolute independent singleness. William Wordsworth. Nature does not complete things, she is chaotic. Man must finish, and he does so by making a garden and building a wall. Robert Frost. What sorts of perception underlie those kinds of statements? So let's begin with objective perception, which underlies the statements of those two scientists, and essentially situates the observer outside what's observed, in effect alienated from the natural world, as expressed in this painting that I made over 50 years ago when I was distressed at the beginning of my PhD research. Then the subjective perception, and here's a painting that I made much more recently called Honeysuckle Sharing Circle. Subjective perception, by contrast with objective perception, includes the observer within what's observed. But each observer is centered in their own worldview, not necessarily a worldview shared with others. And here's yet another painting that I made, again, over 50 years ago, and that you might have to recognize the social context in which I made it at the time. But it's a painting which celebrates what I call focus and circumspection, both the narrowing in and widening out views of our situation in the natural world. On the left, we have hawks representing a predatory worldview with eyes on the front of our faces and an inclination to sort things out and isolate one thing from another. The swans, on the other hand, have eyes on the sides of their heads and have more panoramic, all-round perception associated with their vegetarian diet and way of life. Question is, can we combine focus and circumspection in order to arrive at a different way of understanding, or a deeper and wider way of understanding that combines focus and circumspection and involves seeing both ways, both subjectively and objectively, and marrying the two and going beyond each of them on their own? And the book here is called Naturescope, and on the front cover of it is a painting I made called Holding Openness, which expresses this basic understanding that comes through combining focus and circumspection. Let's reflect on how our view of nature affects our language, our reasoning, our behavior, our priorities, our well-being, and how we actually feel about ourselves, each other, and our surroundings. Let's start with language. There is a language that we've all been brought up to use and think of as a definitive kind of language, and actually characterizes current scientific language. It's impersonal, and it emphasizes separation and definition in various ways. So we have words like opposition, competition, cooperation, connection, definition, division, reproduction, selection, force, cause and effect. So as though we're imagining the world as a billiard ball world in a box. And there's an underpinning assumption to all that nature consists wholly of one or more countable things that can either be divided or united by drawing lines or putting them in a box. It's an assumption that has been woven through our understanding of the world, in our mathematics, in our science, in IT, and so-called artificial intelligence. And it's become deeply embedded in our educational, social, political, and economic structures and managerial practices. The question I ask again, is this the best way to describe nature and how nature works? Can we humans truly exclude ourselves from nature and hence regard nature as something we can choose whether or not to interact with or care about? Does removing us, taking ourselves out of the picture, make our description of nature truly impartial? Or does it instead misrepresent reality by excluding something vital? And is nature really defined by lines and boxes? And does life really evolve by selecting what fits best into those boxes? I don't think so. It's very far removed from the natural world that I have come to know, love, and try to understand as home. So I have sought a truly impartial description by, as I say, combining focused and circumspect ways of seeing and feeling. And this takes us towards a more realistic, or what I feel to be is a more realistic description. Questioning that assumption helped me better represent the nature I actually experienced. I recognized that at its core is a misconception of space as a gap and boundaries as definitive cutoffs between things. This misconception affects both how we feel and act towards nature. It can be remedied by recognizing that in nature, space is present everywhere and always, while what we think of as things occur only somewhere, sometime. So we arrive at an understanding that nature both includes and is included within everything. Very simple. Try drawing a circle without including space within the movement of your pencil, or in the case I'm showing here, the movement of my finger. The circle is formed over time by movement around a central point in space. For me, this offers a better way to understand how natural forms actually arise. It led me to develop a language and a way of reasoning that regards the evolution of natural diversity as a flow of changing possibility, not a sorting mechanism that weeds out what's not wanted. So we arrive then at natural inclusion and the language of flow. Nature includes and is included within everything. Everything is made from space and energy. Nature doesn't sort, nature flows. We have natural inclusion, not natural selection. Or to put it much more comprehensively, natural inclusion is the mutually inclusive, co-creative, receptive, responsive relationship between intangible spatial stillness and energetic motion in the being, becoming, and evolutionary diversification of all material bodies, including our own, as flow forms. Let's now look at living organisms as examples of flow forms or expressions of natural energy flow around and within space. This is another painting I made at the turn of the millennium, which is called Future Present, and I thought of it at the time as a present to the future, in which we get out of the box of definitive thinking and into the appreciation of the fluid dynamics of natural evolutionary diversification. Let's begin to think about plants as flow forms. Here we've got a little oxalis plant and also a moss inhabiting the gap between two paving slabs and sort of splurging out from the gap in between these sort of, like I think of as intangible, impenetrable blocks of cement. Can anyone look at a tree and not see it as an expression of flow? Both above ground and, less obviously, but there it is, underground too. So we have above ground and underground flow systems contributing to this wonderful emergence form that we call a tree. Look at these wonderful sprays of wild claret plants. Difficult, hard not to see them as sprays. Look at this unfurling of a fern frond. Look at these sort of wavelets of a liverwort, of the crested cup liverwort. Or crescent cup liverwort, I got that wrong in the moment. Then, of course, lichens. We have these crusty forms, we have these shrubby forms, and we have these sort of ribbon-like or leafy forms. All of them clear expressions of natural energy flow in space-time. Animals as flow forms. Can you look at this young peregrine falcon without seeing the flow of its feathers over its head, down its chest, over its wings? And here's a migrant hawker dragonfly. And we see that wonderful pattern of venation flow systems in its wings that keep it alive, keep it going. A caterpillar flowing, oozing along a branch, a drinker moth caterpillar. Snail flow, this wonderful spiraling form, including a very slimy and fluid animal. Fungi as flow forms. Well, fungi were the first organisms really to catch my attention and help me to understand natural inclusion as expressions of flow. Here's the wonderful fly agaric fungus, Amanita muscaria, and we see these wonderful stages in its formation, from primordium, the early stage, to fully expanded stage. So it's sort of I used to do for students. I used to go out into the countryside and find fungal fruit bodies in order to take them back to a laboratory and display them. And in that process, it felt very uncomfortable in a way. There was something I was doing that didn't feel right, even though I was trying desperately hard to provide an education for students. And you sort of can get it in the way that these fruit bodies have been abstracted out of their natural situation and put in a basket. But underneath those so-called fruit bodies that we see are actually a production team. So the film star of those fruit bodies appearing on the stage of life is actually enabled to come into existence, or into occurrence, as I prefer to call it, as a product of an underground flow system or production team called a mycelium. And this mycelium has extraordinary behavioral patterns. Here's a mycelium that's been cultivated in the laboratory on an egg, on a Petri dish containing an agar medium. And it just looks like a sort of rather boring mass of cotton wool growing out radially from a central point. But if we look carefully at it and start to look microscopically at it, we see that it's not a system of cotton wool at all, but a wonderful intricate system of tubes that branch, that grow at their tips, and can actually, as in these pictures, fuse with one another to transform from a tree-like branching pattern into a true flow network. And here's a wonderful experiment done by a student of mine once upon a time, in which she grew a mycelium in alternating nutrient-rich and nutrient-poor chambers, and showed how the mycelium adjusted its pattern of development according to where it was situated, alternating between assimilative and distributive forms. In so doing, really demonstrating the true nature of sustainable development. Fungi also have territories, which is something I discovered very early on in my studies by cutting through tree stumps and logs and discovering these wonderful mosaic patterns in the decaying wood, which were inhabited by different colonies of fungi, but different mycelia, both belonging to the same and of different species. And we've got this wonderful pattern, and the slides on the right of this picture, you can see examples of what happens when you pair these colonies or mycelia together in culture. Extraordinary behavior. So they're actually very territorial, but that doesn't mean that they're making enemies of one another. They also form partnerships, very famously. This is a very famous experiment made by Professor Sir David Reed at one stage, showing a mycelium interconnecting two different pine seedlings and enabling enabling interflow between them through the mycelial tubes. And all this gave rise, in my mind, to a painting which I made actually for the British Mycological Society back in 1998 when I was its president, and depicted fungi as fountains of the forest. What's this painting illustrating? It's actually trying to illustrate the idea of trees as welcome homes for fungi. Embodied water flows from roots to branch and back. A tree is a solar-powered fountain, its water supplied through its roots and woody tubes, sealed in by bark until its final outburst in leaves. Within and upon its surfaces and reaching out into air and soil are the mycelial networks of fungi, which provide flow channels from neighbor to neighbor, living to dead and dead to living. Imagination itself. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. Some see nature as all ridicule and deformity, and some scarce see nature at all. But by the eyes of a man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. Imagine what a difference it would make not to think that life is a struggle for existence, not to think that supremacy is success, not to think that strength is good and weakness is bad, and instead to feel the joy and solace of being included within nature, not separated from or connected to it as an object. To view evolution as the sustaining of the possible, not the survival of the fittest. Diversity occurs because it can. To recognize that being needful is not selfish or inadequate, and that compassion can take the place of strife in our lives. To use the language of flow in place of the language of separation. To view life as an inheritance that we receive, nurture, and pass on in natural relay. To understand that to care for nature is to care for ourselves. What 3 words? After all the wrangling, jangling war of words and weaponry that sets our nerves on edge, trigger happy, what 3 words could change the course of human history? From antipathy to empathy. Simply these. Nature includes you. Let's try to imagine just what that truly means. Nature includes you. Flow well